Women's bodies and beauty have been scrutinized across centuries, with each culture having different opinions on what the ideal woman would look like. Although the realist and most ideal version of beauty is being happy in the skin you're in, historically, changing trends of physical appreciation can tell us more about the culture of the time. Today, we are looking at the ever-changing vision of ideal beauty throughout American history. Back in the 1700s, American culture was just being established for the first time. The 13 colonies had branched out and were expanding, and the America we know today was taking shape. In the first half of the 18th century, Americans commonly mimicked the attire and appearance of the Europeans they were descended from. Among the white upper-class colonialists, the women's role was at home. Expected to manage the household and give birth to plenty of children, women in the 18th century were often married by 13, before their bodies and looks had a proper chance to mature. When they did mature, though, the men were all about the curves. The average white colonial woman was expected to have good, wide breeding hips, bosoms to fill out the new low-cut corsets, and small, symmetrical, pleasant faces, adorned with face powder, rouge, and perfume. By the late 18th century and through the 19th, American women had really taken to makeup. Their looks became more elaborate, using creams, eyeshadows, oils, and lotions across their faces, and large decorative wigs and hairstyles that they would wear for weeks at a time. Curves continued to be favored by the upper-class elite of America through the 18th and 19th centuries. Their fashion accentuated the ideal figure with large hoop skirts, tiny corseted waists, and pushed-up breasts. Really, corsets were just the first padded bras. Men have been providing women with their unsolicited opinion for centuries. In the 1890s, American artist Charles Gibson created a series of sketches that he said were a composite of thousands of American girls in order to reach the ultimate feminine ideal. He called his creation the Gibson Girl because, well, of course he did. On the bright side, at least he gave the Gibson Girl stereotype a personality. The Gibson Girl, Charles Gibson described, was bright, vivacious, sexually dominant, and even stood up to men. They were tall and slender, yet also had breasts and a bottom to die for, and carried themselves with regal elegance. They even wore S-bend corsets to accentuate this. Essentially, the ideal look was Jessica Rabbit. This remained the gold standard of female beauty until World War I, when pesky practicality got in the way. From 1900 to 1914, clothing changed dramatically. Women swapped the ball gowns and corsets in favor of less fabric, wearing blouses and simple skirts, and even trousers. This can be directly linked to their new role outside the home. With men at war, women had to take over jobs that required practical clothing and newfound freedom. And with it came the decline of interest in butts and breasts. By the 1920s, the flapper fashion had taken America by storm, and with it, a brand new ideal body type for women. Gone were the curves, instead tiny waists and straight up and down figures with small breasts and bottoms was the fashion. It was an era where women no longer had to conform to the traditional aspects of femininity and could experiment with their clothing and appearances in ways they hadn't dared previously. They cut their hair, exposed their skin, and spoke up for women's rights. Plucked, high-arching eyebrows became all the rage. After all, you can say far more with one facial expression than a whole sentence. Although there was this ideal body trend, it is what it represented that is important. For the first time, females were dressing and experimenting with their clothes and looks for themselves and experiencing freedom outside the home, working and socializing, rather than as objects to suit male desire. The rise of Hollywood in the 1930s and 40s put greater scrutiny on women's appearance than ever before. A more traditional, wholesome image became the rage once again, with emphasis on tiny waists and larger breasts back in the limelight, but with an overall softer emphasis than the harsh body lines of the past. Shoulder pads and tight skirts like those worn by Greta Garbo became the heights of fashion, and women modeled themselves on the look of actresses like Joan Crawford and Katharine Hepburn. After World War II, everyone desperately needed a break. And what better way to let loose and relax than objectifying women? Close-fitting dresses and bare legs were popular, and curvy bodies were back in fashion. The 50s was the era of the hourglass figure, and thinner women were encouraged to gain weight to achieve it. Popular Hollywood stars like Marilyn Monroe became the new epitome of beauty women were to strive for, and they were assaulted from all angles with instructions on how to achieve this perfect body. Don't get us wrong, Marilyn Monroe was absolutely stunning, and her appearance became synonymous with the 1950s ideal woman. There was far more to her and her life than just her figure. 10 years later, in the 1960s, women were expected to reverse again, back in the other direction. With the constant pressure to lose weight, gain weight, develop curves and lose them again, it's a wonder women got anything else done. The 1960s returned to a more flapper era style of looks and dress. Androgynous-looking models like Twiggy personified the newest ideal body type, thin and doll-faced with small hips and breasts. The easiest way to describe this new look was the A-line body type, and women wore the dresses to match. This new androgynous look laid the way to the fresh-faced, youthful look of the later 60s, where hippie fashion and style took over. It was the heights of flower power and being at one with nature, and the clothing and styles matched. Women's hair was long, and their makeup took on a more natural look, if it was worn at all. The 1970s saw the first black woman on the cover of Vogue. Women of different colors were entering the limelight, and what was considered mainstream beautiful started to be redefined to include them. The fact that it took till the 70s for this to happen is a topic for another video. Although supermodels have been around for at least 70 years, it wasn't until the late 70s, early 80s, that women had their names recognized for the first time and thus became synonymous with the ideal body type. Images of tall Amazonian-type women with long legs like Naomi Campbell and Elle Macpherson dominated public spaces. But don't worry, if you weren't tall and leggy, then you were expected to be short and toned instead. The 80s was also the era of the home fitness video, encouraging women to not only work and do the bulk of the child and house care, but if they had a spare moment, pop in a Jane Fonda and get to work on those glutes. Our beauty standards shrunk from there. By the 90s, extremely thin, thinner than the flappers and twiggies of the 20s and 60s, the 90s was the era of the super skinny supermodel. Think Kate Moss, Claudia Schiffer. This new craze led to the new and disturbing term, heroin chic. But just a decade later, in the noughts, we were back to curvy, sexy, and altogether more striking looks. Women colored their hair, wore more revealing clothing, and the overall healthier figure, a la Beyoncé and Shakira, was in. Apparently, society decided the close-to-death look was no longer in. Which all brings us to today. Throughout the 2010s and now into the 2020s, there's been a much bigger focus on body positivity rather than adhering to a cultural norm. Women should be comfortable in the skin they're in, no matter of its size and color. And there's been a rise of beautiful, eclectic women who have been unafraid to stand up and lead the way, showing it's okay to look how you look and be who you are. That's why today's standards of American beauty are a wide range of shapes, colors, and sizes. That's all for today's video. Let us know in the comments if you think we should do one on men next.